Welcome everyone back to the Pommy and Oz channel. We today are going to look at some major news coming out of the Carlton camp that Nic Newman unfortunately has ruptured a patella tendon, meaning he will miss the majority, if not all, of the 2025 season. But before this injury, there was some rumours that Newman was having a role change. So in this video today, we're going to discuss what that role change may have been, why it could come about, and some potential opportunities this opens up for Carlton's list and an opportunity to really cement their place in the squad for 2025. So let's run that intro, get straight into it. Firstly, let's look at Nic Newman's 2024 season. Playing the entirety of the year, he averaged 23.6 disposals, 8 marks a game, just under 4 tackles, and showing not only his uber consistency, but also his ability to really lock down an opponent and get involved on scoring chains. There was a big talk of him in the pre-season moving across to the midfield. Now, why is this? The only sides that were worse than Carlton are defending stoppages in the forward half of the ground, in their defensive half of the ground last year, were Richmond North and the Eagles. So this is really fascinating for the Blues. The Blues have got to look at them stoppage options. We saw this happen, particularly with St Kilda last year, towards the death, how Carlton can break down at the fall of the ball. It's a real interesting little prospect here because Carlton had some real strong metrics last season, particularly in scores from turnover defence. But one of the big question marks about the Blues is their ability to move the ball at pace and get some natural speed and spread around the ball. It's a very, very clustered formation, particularly in the midfield, that really looks to bust the door down in the midfield as opposed to spread it. So Carlton have probably got an opportunity here to add a new dimension and found a new way of the methodology from back half of the ground to the midfield to make them more up to date with the 2024 model. We saw teams like Brisbane who had massive injuries themselves. They lost Kitty Coleman and we saw how well they managed to negate that, moving Dane Zorko down the back and turning their game plan a little bit differently to still maximise their ability to really hurt you on the counter. So let's have a look at some of the options in that. Now let's start with a player that we know. Now the rumours are Ollie Hollands is playing down the back this year. And let's look at someone that might take that wing role and offer a bit of dynamism. Last year, we saw Ollie Hollands particularly protect that left-hand side when he was playing, or the right-hand side, protecting Saad's overlapping run or Nic Newman's run. And suddenly with Nic Newman being out and Ollie Hollands playing down the back in a more defensive role, we may see something that moves to more the State League in their draft year, where Ollie did often protect Jaxon Binns, who started more across the half forward and then worked his way up the wing. His VFL form has been super impressive, and I would say Jaxon Binns is probably one of the most developed players from his draft year to now in the skills that he's brought in his game. The big thing with Jaxon is he looks to take the game on with his pace, but also his elite engine, and looks to hit hot zones. One thing about Jaxon as well, which we noticed in his VFL year, particularly the year he won the BNF in the VFL, was his ability around forward half stoppages, but also defending in them stoppages. Carlton have come a cropper many a time by teams playing an extra around stoppage. What this does is takes away Carlton's extra handball chain, and that is what Carlton really look to do. They almost go backwards to go forwards in the stoppage area, which puts them under a lot of cosh. We saw that numerous times where that extra handball was taken away by playing the extra. Burns did this fantastically for St Kilda, creating Carlton an option to do a handball in hope or a kick in hope, putting them under more trouble. We saw Blake Acres quite happy to slide down to halfback as well as Carlton looked to make that rotation. So Jaxon Binns may be one player here where Carlton go, right, okay, Ollie Hollands off the halfback line, simple fix. Jaxon Binns takes that midfield role, and it would have been quite an obvious call for Nic Newman to play a bit more wing. As we saw in the David Teague era, he did look pretty good ahead of the ball, and it is probably an easier job for Nic Newman, who is cracking on a bit. So Jaxon Binns is definitely one here who I'm really looking at to maybe fulfill the wing role while Ollie Hollands fills that halfback role full-time. Next, we have the elder statesman, Sam Docherty, injured for the majority of 2024, who has been redeveloped as a midfielder, but this time last year they were talking about a mid-forward role. He's incredibly versatile, as he seems to have played every position at Carlton, but the key positions and the ruck. Now, obviously with Nic Newman, the biggest loss you're going to lose is his leadership and his capability of adding a bit of calmness. Doc has got that in abundance. His on-field experience really does help the Blues. His ability to read the play and also direct the backline shouldn't be understated. When Carlton's defensive structure, when it falls down, it is up there with one of the worst in the league. And that is a big issue. Carlton were a little bit like Tottenham are in the Premier League, where they could score at will, but they could also lose at will. And this is a big structural thing where Carlton at times got a little bit reactive and started to stand in the positions where they needed to be, as opposed to get to the position of the ball and then back yourself to protect the area at the fall of the ball. Sam Docherty could be a really interesting avenue, but this would really allude to me that Carlton would be looking at the same halfback transition that we've seen, which at times, as we said earlier in the video, has got them into trouble. Sam Docherty has been there and done that and fulfilled that role. So is it a shift back down to halfback, or Carlton going to be bold and look at other options? That being said, with Carlton being bold, there is a gentleman that hasn't debuted yet, and that is Billy Wilson. The big thing about Billy Wilson is his pace straight off the bat, but also his aggressiveness at the fall of the ball. He offers speed, skill, but also very attacking natural traits, which is the opposite probably of Nic Newman. Now, what you lose in the consistency of Nic Newman, you will gain in that zip, that running off half back, and that is probably the next avenue for Carlton. We saw Carlton's phenomenal scoring rate on scores from turnover, which is a big shift for Carlton in the last 3 years, and it has probably catapulted them in to what is ever the Premiership window. Obviously, Billy Wilson coming in suddenly changes that fast break situation, and as Adam Stard starts to slow and he has maybe lost that half yard of pace, Carlton suddenly have an option to break lines, look for quick transition, and look to overload the midfield, which is what Carlton attempt to do when they have the ball in hand. Obviously, this is probably the most risky of the options, but could be really entertaining to see what may happen. Up next, we have talked about him at length, and that is Mr. Ollie Hollands. Ollie Hollands has been training with a half-back line and has, by all reports, had great reviews. Now, why would Ollie Hollands be a half-back flanker? Well, you've got to look at his starting position. Although he starts on the wing, he spends the majority of his time, almost 60%, oscillating at that half-back line, protecting the attacking wingers or attacking the overlap from his halfbacks. It makes sense because people talk about Ollie Hollands' kicking, but Ollie Hollands' kicking in space has been quite good. The big question mark is when he gets overloaded in the midfield, which teams do quite often with Carlton, particularly knowing that the spread is quite one dynamic, and that is where that cagey kick has come in. This could be a really fascinating scenario here for Ollie, because Ollie playing at halfback opens the door to other players, particularly a rotation on the wing, for players like Sam Walsh, for players like Jaxon Binns, to really add a bit of more dynamicness. Because when Carlton get it from fullback to halfback, that is usually where it comes off and you see that long bomb down the wing. Ollie Hollands may look to have that corridor kick, and we saw him being one of the more proactive players at going in the corridor. The big thing about Ollie as well is he isn't scared of tackling. We saw that last year, that he was willing to get up, and the fact that he does that majority of the time, running back, chasing people, does give Carlton a little bit of hope that maybe starting him off the halfback, he's got people coming onto him, which allows him to really focus that game. Ollie would be a real good candidate for this because suddenly it offers Carlton an option to play an extra attacking midfielder and create more rotation in their midfield areas, which I think is a big cause of why Carlton late in the game hemorrhaged so many scores from stoppage. Carlton's stoppage game last year, you can see why Voss looked at Nic Newman to change it. One of the top scoring sides, but only the bottom two sides were worse than us at defending from stoppage. So that is an area where Carlton have got to get a bit smarter and rapidly. A left field pick here would be Lucas Camporeale. He's a player that I really want you to watch. Now, I talked about him a lot in the draft by saying that the big thing about Lucas is his work rate, his consistency, but also his ability to shelve his game for the defensive mindset of the club. It's almost similar to Nic Newman, and it's probably a year too early for me. But with Nic Newman playing a more off-field role, this is something late in the season with a couple of VFL games people really need to watch out for. Lucas sacrifices his game for the betterment of the system, and that is kind of what Nic Newman does. Nic Newman was Carlton's primary exeter out of D50 last year, and I think although he is a huge loss, that means Carlton have got to look for a more dynamic approach. The big thing about Lucas is sometimes he bites off more than he can chew. However, he has got incredible defensive resilience, but also really looks to slot in and protect players who look to overlap, which was paramount in South Australia's games last year. You really saw he was happy to sit in that defensive role. He's definitely a depth option at the moment, but Lucas is someone that could learn a lot in the first half of the year from feeding from Doc and Nic Newman. And then we're going to talk about Sam Walsh. Sam Walsh has had these hamstring issues. And if you are moving Ollie to halfback, is this a chance to return to his best year of Sam Walsh's, where he had a staggering 30-plus Brownlow votes, where we saw him play a more 60-40 percentage role out wide? Sam Walsh has been almost used as Audi's Patrick Cripps in the early years of his career. But where we saw him really flourish, particularly in the finals last year, where we saw him have less on-ball minutes and more being that extra around stoppage, we saw Sam Walsh's ability to have that elite running. His two-way running was paramount, but also his ability to start and end the chain. And there was a few goals in that year. Sam Walsh could be one of these players that Carlton look at and go, right, we've got Ollie at halfback. Sam Docherty is going to come on the ball and pinch it out wide and halfback, opening up Sam Walsh to have a little bit more time to protect his back, but more importantly, use his weapons out wide and penetrate 50 deep. Sam Walsh is incredibly good at that. And if we go back to a couple of years where he had all them Brownlow votes, we saw his running bounce and going in to try and kick goals. This could be a real interesting strategic move and one that many people don't expect, but one that does fill me with excitement if we can look at Sam Walsh and try and free him up and protect his body. And finally, are Carlton going to do something intelligent? There is a gentleman that's come in that is a top 3 pick, my number 1 rated and number 2 rated player in the draft all year last year, Jagga Smith. Now, there's a lot of buzz around Jagga Smith for a reason. He is an incredibly football IQ player who has got that real strong defensive base, but also an incredibly athletic base. Now, the one knock on him is a bit like his mate, Nick Dacos. He's lightweight, and that is because his body is naturally designed to evade contact. Now, when you look at that, people always forget evasion against children is the same as evasion against men. They run a little bit slower, these men, so his evasion skills are already there. But you do want to add some body on him, like Nick Dacos has, who was incredibly grown physically in his time at Collingwood, to really allow him to feed in. Carlton have made this mistake a lot with young midfielders, played them straight on the ball, they've got battered, they've lost their confidence. See Paddy Dow, see Zach Fisher, see SPS, and see Sam Walsh, who's had that massive back complaint, and now it's leaking elsewhere with the pre-season lacks. So Jagga Smith could be one that they look to rotate at halfback. What is the benefit of this? Well, one, the big knock on Jagga Smith is at times his ability to get the game moving forward. He does look for safety first, which helps Carlton's half-back line, because at times Carlton have got too needy to get the ball forward, which has put them under needless pressure as they have not been able to defend quick enough in that team system. Carlton's team defence is strong. It's when you get as one out and things like that where it all falls off, and that is usually from a fast-paced turnover. This could be invaluable in today's fast-paced game, playing him off the half-back line, allowing him to use his composure, allowing him to use his skill sets to learn the game, but also become a key part of the transition game, learn the speed of the game, and ultimately a long-term investment for him to be ready in 2026 to really take a full-time midfield role. I really like this one, and I could see this one really working, because if Carlton can add another rotation, a la GWS, where they have 7, 8, 9 midfielders that rotate between half forward and half back, this could be a real fascinating one. And it opens up an opportunity with Newman being injured, not to play a full-time halfback, but to play a part-time halfback that can rotate and then a lot more trust is put in Jordan Boyd and Lockie Cowan to play in them pockets to give them some stabilisation. So, there's some of the options for Carlton with Nic Newman going. Several options to explore. Each player, I think, bringing a unique skill set to the table, but also something that adds a dynamicness to Carlton, which I feel like at the moment, Carlton's ball movement, particularly from the back half of the ground, is very one-dimensional. Let me know what you think and who would you go with and what are you looking forward to seeing? Obviously, there is two ways to look at this. One, doom and gloom. Two, the way I'm looking at it, this is an opportunity for us to progress. And if we can be at the end of the season where we're like, okay, Nic Newman's an asset to come back, or even a depth player because a young player has taken that position, that leaves Carlton in a great position. Make sure you leave a comment below. Hope you enjoyed the breakdown. If you did, let me know you enjoyed the content. Leave a thumbs up. Please subscribe for more AFL content as well. We're really trying to kick on this year in 2025. Peace, love and light. Pommy out.